The sun beat down mercilessly on Blackwater County as sheriff. Tom Brennan hammered the notice onto the weathered post outside the saloon. Jack Morrison stood with his arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached, reading the words that would change his life forever. According to the old territorial law nobody had bothered to repeal, any landowner over 30 without heirs had 60 days to marry or forfeit half their property to the county. His ranch, the Double M, 4,000 acres his grandfather had bled for, was now hanging in the balance. At 32, Jack had built his entire life around that land, rising before dawn to mend fences, breaking horses that others deemed unbreakable, sleeping under stars that witnessed his every sacrifice. Marriage had never factored into his plans, not after watching his father drink himself to death over a woman who'd run off to San Francisco. Now the county commissioners, led by the snake-eyed Victor Hartwell, who'd been eyeing Jack's water rights for years, had given him an ultimatum wrapped in century-old legislation. The only eligible woman left in Blackwater County was Eleanor Pritchard, and Jack's stomach turned at the thought. The whole town called her the old maid, though she was only 29. Eleanor lived in a cramped room above the general store where she kept the books, her dresses always gray or brown, her dark hair pulled back so severely it seemed to pain her. Folks said she was cold as January ice, that she'd turned down every suitor who'd ever approached, content to live and die alone with her numbers and ledgers. Jack had spoken to her maybe 3 times in 5 years, each interaction brief and forgettable. She had a sharp tongue and sharper eyes that seemed to calculate a man's worth in seconds, and always found him wanting. When Jack approached her after church that Sunday, hat in his weathered hands, the proposal came out like gravel. "Miss Pritchard, I've got a business proposition." Eleanor looked up from her Bible, those calculating eyes meeting his without a flicker of emotion. "I heard about the law. You need a wife. I assume you're here, because I'm the only option left." Her bluntness caught him off guard. "It wouldn't be a real marriage," he stammered. "Just on paper. You'd have your own room, your own life. I just need to satisfy the law and keep my land." Eleanor closed her Bible slowly, and for the first time, Jack noticed how elegant her hands were, long-fingered and graceful despite the ink stains. "And what do I get, Mr. Morrison, besides the honor of being your legal property?" The edge in her voice could have cut glass. Jack hadn't thought that far. "You'd have security, a home, anything you need." She stood, barely reaching his shoulder, but somehow making him feel small. "I'll marry you, Mr. Morrison, but not as your charity case. I want full partnership in the ranch, equal say in all decisions and my name on the deed. Otherwise, you can forfeit your land to Hartwell for all I care." Jack's pride screamed at him to refuse, but desperation won. They were married 3 weeks later in a ceremony that lasted 7 minutes. With only the judge and his wife as witnesses, Eleanor wore the same brown dress she wore to church. Jack wore his only suit, smelling of camphor and regret. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, they didn't kiss, didn't even touch. They simply signed the papers and walked out into separate futures that happened to share the same address. That night, Eleanor moved into the ranch house with a single trunk of belongings and took the bedroom at the far end of the hall. Jack lay awake in his own bed, wondering what devil's bargain he'd just made and whether saving his land would cost him something far more valuable. Through the walls, he could hear Eleanor moving around, unpacking her mysterious life, and he realized he'd just married a complete stranger who now owned half of everything he'd ever loved. Eleanor Pritchard Morrison stood on the porch of the ranch house as dawn broke over Blackwater County, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. Jack had left before sunrise, mumbling something about checking the north pasture, clearly desperate to avoid her. Perfect. She had work to do, and a husband underfoot would only complicate matters. See, what nobody in Blackwater County knew was that the old maid keeping books at the general store had been quietly running the most successful investment scheme in 3 territories. Every penny of her modest salary had been transformed, through careful speculation, in railroad stocks, mining operations, and land acquisitions. The gray dresses and severe hairstyles had been camouflage, a way to become invisible while she built an empire in the shadows. She'd turned down suitors not from coldness but from calculation. Not one of them had been worth derailing her plans. But when she'd heard about the marriage law, Eleanor had seen something nobody else had: opportunity. Jack Morrison was land rich but cash poor, struggling to keep his ranch afloat through sheer stubbornness and pride. His water rights alone were worth a fortune, but he was too busy playing cowboy to see it. Within a week, Eleanor had transformed the ranch house. She converted the unused parlor into an office, installing a telegraph machine she'd had shipped from Denver. Jack came home to find her surrounded by papers, rapidly coding messages to her contacts in San Francisco and Chicago. "What in God's name is all this?" he demanded, dusty and exhausted from a day's work. Eleanor didn't look up. "I'm saving your ranch. The cattle market is about to crash. I'm liquidating your herd at current prices, before the bottom drops." "Out." Jack's face went purple. "You can't sell my cattle. That's my entire operation." Now she looked at him, and her eyes held something he'd never seen before: fierce intelligence burning like wildfire. "Read your own marriage contract, Mr. Morrison. I have equal say. Those cattle will be worth half their current value in 6 weeks when the Chicago stockyards overflow. I'm selling now and reinvesting in something actually profitable." They fought for 3 hours, Jack's voice rising while Eleanor's remained maddeningly calm, countering every one of his objections with facts, figures, and projections. Finally exhausted, he agreed to let her sell half the herd. When those cattle sold for record prices just days before the market collapsed, exactly as she'd predicted, Jack Morrison began to see his wife with new eyes. Over the following months, Eleanor revolutionized everything. She negotiated contracts with the railroad to run a spur line through Morrison property in exchange for permanent water rights payments. She identified mineral deposits on the northern section and leased exploration rights for a percentage that would make them wealthy regardless of what was found. She hired top hands at wages that made Jack choke but quickly proved their worth by increasing productivity threefold. The Double M, once struggling to break even, became the most profitable operation in 5 counties. Eleanor began appearing at county meetings, and her sharp tongue found new targets. When Victor Hartwell proposed a dam that would have flooded out 3 smaller ranches, Eleanor eviscerated his plan with a 30-minute presentation on water law that left him speechless and humiliated. When the school needed funding, she organized a charity auction that raised more money in one night than the county had budgeted for 5 years. Jack watched his wife transform, not just his ranch but the entire social order of Blackwater County, and something shifted in his chest. The way she laughed when she finally let her hair down, literally and figuratively. How she looked in riding clothes as she surveyed their land, eyes bright with plans and possibilities. The gentle way she treated the ranch hands, learning their names and their stories. One evening, 6 months after their marriage, Eleanor found a telegram on her desk. Her contacts in San Francisco were offering her a position that would make her one of the most powerful businesswomen in California. Jack stood in the doorway, having read it over her shoulder, his heart in his throat. "You going to take it?" "I've got a ranch to run, Mr. Morrison, unless you'd prefer to do it alone." Jack crossed the room, and for the first time since their 7-minute wedding, he took his wife's hand. "I'd prefer if you'd call me Jack, and if maybe we could move you out of that far bedroom." Eleanor smiled, genuinely smiled, and Blackwater County would talk for generations about how the cowboy rancher and the old maid built an empire on equal ground, proving that the best marriages aren't found in romance but forged in respect, partnership, and the courage to let someone surprise you.